AskReddit by Kilmamja. Do you know someone who died from something they actively denied or mocked? What happened to them? My uncle got in a drunken motorcycle wreck and had to have half his jaw rebuilt. Didn't take his antibiotics because I never get sick. Well, he had never had his jaw rebuilt either. He died of the infection when it got to his brain. He died screaming in agony. That's my last memory of him. Holy shit, imagine dying because you refuse to take a pill daily. Absolutely wild. I had a friend in high school who drove erratically. He was my close friend, but I never let him drive me anywhere and told him he drove too fast and took too many risks. He once followed in his own car and ran a red light downhill because it's 3 AM. Who is on the road? He was so young. He died in a car accident driving erratically just shy of his 17th birthday. There were 3 other kids in the car, and the 2 in the back were almost unharmed, dislocated shoulder and glass cuts from the windows. My friend died on impact and the girl in the front seat had a traumatic brain injury. Edit. For all the people wondering if this is from their school, it is crazy how many details line up with other instances but other states. Truly terrifying. WA state. I'm sure that was a tough thing for you to deal with while in high school. The interesting thing to me is the part about 3 AM. I'm a baker, so I'm driving to work at that time, and the amount of people who blow through red lights is crazy. They really do think no one is on the road at that time, but there are plenty like me who have weird work hours. I took a roofing job one summer with no prior experience, and while I was in college, the boss had us running around on the roof with no harness. He complained I was too slow. I told him I didn't feel safe and felt there should be more protective measures. He fired me a week later. He hired my uncle who had experience, and my uncle insisted he wear a harness. My uncle got his way. 2 weeks later, my former boss fell off the roof 2 stories high but fell right on his ass in an upright seating position. You can imagine the damage. All his ribs were fractured and broke his spine. He is now paralyzed and lives in constant pain. Last I heard, he was trying to get medical assistance suicide. It's legal in my country, but he doesn't meet the criteria. My mother died of end-stage liver failure. It was caused by drinking. She went to her grave telling people she had some weird genetic liver problem. When faced with a gastroenterologist who knew better, she wouldn't fess up. According to her, she could just get a new liver and continue living. Nothing the medical professionals or I could do to convince her that she didn't qualify because of life choices. She hadn't been sober long enough. When alcohol wasn't offered, she began turning to food instead. She ended up dying in hospice 6 years ago. What kills me is the amount of time I spend taking her to DR apps, trying to take her to AA meetings, but according to her, all of her liver problems were my problem, not hers. My brother's wife died just like that. Worst thing I've ever seen. She was made fully aware that she needed to stop drinking or die, and she kept drinking. The lawyer that fought against helmet laws for motorcycles in Florida was killed along with his SO in a motorcycle crash. They ran into a trailer or something. My dad refused to wear a helmet on his motorcycle, so whenever he talked about it, my sister and I would start discussing what we're going to do with our half of the life insurance money. I think it freaked him out, so he sold the bike last year. Thank God. My uncle insisted that the link between smoking and cancer was a bunch of hippie do-gooder bullshit. Guess what he died of? Beaten to death by a hippie swinging a sack of granola? My uncle thought that seat belts were for cowards. He was a good driver. The drunk driver that killed him wasn't. There was a car commercial, nearly 30 years ago, that I still remember. There's a guy driving down a highway and the voiceover says you could be the safest driver in the world. Hands at 10 and 2. Always check your blind spot. Then the guy gets passed by a car carrier full of wrecked cars and the voiceover continues, but what if everyone else isn't? The CEO of Ersinga denied warnings from others about his soon-to-be great submarine. He didn't listen. He proudly stated in interviews that he cuts corners with safety. My uncle. First went his eyes, then he couldn't walk. Then his leg. Diabetes is a slow killer. You actively see someone die right in front of you and unfortunately there's nothing you can do about it. Especially if they refuse to change their eating habits. Unfortunately my mom. It will be 2 years next week. She slowly eat herself to death. It makes me so mad, but also sad at the same time. PFFT, you guys are pussies. Health and safety has gone mad, no wonder all the apprentices don't know shit. About 6 months before he took a diamond cutting wheel to the face. Hot fuzz. Nasty way to go. I recently heard my landlord ranting about being on a construction site, working on a ceiling. So basically he was strapped in a harness and amp, dangling 25 feet or so up in the air, and how annoying it was that a guy from OSHA came by and told him he had to wear a helmet. I guess his head must be hard enough it wouldn't matter. Wasn't necessarily mocked, but a few years ago my grandmother was extremely sick and in the hospital. She wasn't estimated to have much longer. My grandfather was having an affair with an old girlfriend in a different state and left my grandmother for dead. She became healthy enough to be moved to a nursing home where she decided to file for divorce after 50 years of marriage. Within a year, almost to the day, she grew healthier, and he ultimately died of the same health issues she had back in the hospital. I love that for her. She's strong as hell. A co-worker that became a good friend. She denied her fiancé, father of 2 youngest kids, was an abuser. Even after a DV situation resulting in a broken nose, jaw, and lacerated spleen. She also denied she was addicted to meth and could stop anytime. He provided her the drugs. So when she broke up with him, within 1 week was back. Always went back. He shot and killed the father of her 2 older kids, then shot and killed her, then ran over her body to make sure she was dead in front of her kids. In a Walgreens parking lot. He then committed suicide by cop. In one day, all 4 of her kids lost all their parents. This happened about 6 weeks ago and I'm still reeling. Even being near a situation that bad is traumatizing. I'm sorry you lost your friend. People reading this story, consider those willing to physically abuse their partners as potential murderers. Do not allow DV to be normalized in any way. All the tourists in Hana, Maui who don't heed the posted warnings and locals' advice about the flash floods. The last time we were there 3 people had died in separate incidents. 2 went right under a waterfall and another died being swept out at Venus pools. So sad and happens almost annually there. Flash floods kill people every year in Arizona and in Utah, as well. Zion tells folks if there's even a cloud in the sky, don't go down the Narrows, but people don't listen. My grandpa never outright denied the negative or mocked smoking, but he sure as hell wasn't going to let cancer get in the way of his lifelong habit. The last week of his life was his longest stretch without a cigarette, since he had started at 14, because he was in a medically induced coma. By the time he passed he had been treated for 3 or 4 different types of cancers, with each one progressively harder to beat. We would eradicate it from one area only to have it appear somewhere else. And yet, he saw no reason to quit his pack a day of unfiltered Camels. I recently learned that filtered cigarettes aren't necessarily better. They found that people who use filtered cigarettes tend to inhale harder deeper since it doesn't feel as harsh, causing issues deeper in the lung tissue than is seen in people who smoke unfiltered. There was a guy in Texas not long ago named Tommy Woodward. There was a flood, thus resulting in a 12-foot alligator lingering around. It was night, and this guy really wanted to go swimming. He was warned about the predator. His last words were $K that gator. As soon as he hit the water, he was taken. https://www.gawker.com/fuck-that-alligator-man-killed-second-after-17158874134. I'm convinced the gator heard him and amp took it as a challenge. My dad. I along with other family members kept trying to warn him he had a drinking problem. He was a good guy and would go out of his way to do the most for me and others, don't get me wrong. I miss him very much. But this was a flaw of his that he denied and would even laugh at. My biological mother was abusive towards him. She ended up abandoning the both of us. I think it started from there as an unhealthy coping mechanism. He ended up getting liver cancer, liver cirrhosis, and passed away within a year of his diagnosis. I wish he would have just listened to us, taken it seriously. I don't think enough people know just how truly awful liver cirrhosis is. It's a horrible way to go. Gun safety. It was drilled into us from our dad as kids about safety of guns. Guns were locked up when not being used and bullets were kept separate. My granddad was less strict. We were at my granddad's house and he was showing his grandkids how to use a rifle. My dad was not keen on it as there was so many kids running around. Granddad told him there was nothing to worry about as there were no bullets in the gun. 3 of us had practice shots, including pulling the trigger. The 4th shot, a loud bang, and a bullet was fired into the shed less than a meter from where the adults were standing. No one was injured, but my granddad was left groveling to my dad. Surprised I haven't run into any gun accident deaths in this thread yet. A few years back I was working at a barn and a thunderstorm rolled in. I was very uncomfortable with how close a storm was, and one of the other women there was very disdainful towards me about wanting to stay indoors until it passed, not wanting to touch the metal gates, etc. She thought that I was being ridiculous and paranoid. Literally the next day her aunt died of a lightning strike. Oof, my mom experienced something similar with her co-worker. They both worked in a hospital and a storm had rolled in at the end of their shift. Mom was hesitant to go out into the parking lot with how much lighting there was. Her co-worker practically scoffed and walked off into the lot to go to his car, where he then died like 50 feet away when he got struck by lightning. So this isn't death, but I had a former close friend who was always posting shit about how vaccines caused autism. This was mostly while she was pregnant. So being the smarty she was, she did not get her son vaccinated. Guess who has non-verbal autism? She's been real quiet on Facebook about all that shit for a long time now. I have a friend who decided not to vaccinate cause she didn't want her kids to get autism. She has 5 kids. The only one without autism is the one that's fully vaccinated. That American guy who went to North Sentinel Island to preach the gospel. Everyone told him not to because a tribe remained uncontacted for centuries and attacked outsiders on sight. They killed him immediately and buried him on the beach, where he is buried to this day. He was warned by tribe once and allowed to leave. He went again and died. I work in an IQ as an RN, also worked in embark for years. From cover denial to cancer to kidney failure, I have seen hundreds of people believe they're invincible. Alcoholism, speeding vehicles, fad diets, you name it, humans don't believe they can die. My own cousin was murdered by her boyfriend because she believed he loved her and denied the abuse. Sorry for your loss. Also, thank you for your service. Speeding. Friend's cousin would always brag about how fast they drove everywhere and how good they were at it. One night he just wrapped himself around a tree. Supposedly he was sober too. 10+ years ago in college I delivered pizzas for a large chain. I had a manager, young guy, very nice. He was speeding in his truck late at night and lost control around a curve. They found his truck upside down in a field, but not him. Nobody knew where he was. It wasn't until they righted the truck when they found his body beneath it. He had been thrown from the truck because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt and then it landed on him. So avoidable. High school classmate of my mother, with questionable hygiene. She never believed anyone, be it female teachers, the school nurse, or even her OB-GYN, about toxic shock syndrome, bitching to anyone how it's a conspiracy to make us bipads. Guess who died at 17 from TSS? I'm a dude, so toxic shock syndrome has no direct effect on me. About 10 years ago I read an article about how homeless women were suffering from toxic shock syndrome because of the inaccessibility of feminine hygiene products due to their cost. Admittedly, this article was from the States and I'm in Canada, so costs may have been different, but the very idea that a woman could get extremely ill or die because of lack of a pad or tampon upset me greatly. I'm the janitor in a community center, and by the end of that day I had explicit permission from the executive director to add a constant replenishment to my city store's consumables order for tampons and pads that went on the rack in the lobby that contained condoms that were given away for free. A decade later and I'm still filling that rack daily. I had an acquaintance who died due to severe head trauma from a motorcycle accident. The accident occurred during a big motorcycle poker run he was participating in, a poker run protesting the new mandatory helmet law our state was enacting. I knew someone that always denied their alcoholism. They died from hepatic cirrhosis a couple of years ago. My dad did a bottle of whiskey a day. Didn't believe his liver was FK'd. Didn't believe he had varices either. Refused banding and carried on drinking. Massive hemorrhage at home. Christmas Day 1999. Resuscitated at the hospital. Developed multi-organ failure and died the 24th of January. My mother told everyone he had cancer and carried on drinking. This podcast guy, Kevin Samuels, preached about women being unhealthy and overweight and how they are going to end up alone. He died alone and the cause of death was hypertension. Edit. One of K-Sam's children made a new account just to defend their daddy. Lol. Edit. 2 more people have made throwaway accounts to defend their daddy. The fact that they're too ashamed to do it from their real accounts should tell you everything you need to know about Kevin Samuels, the twice divorced relationship coach who died of preventable illness. To make it worse, Samuels experienced chest pain while having sex with a woman he had just picked up and collapsed on her. He always talked crap about black women dating and having premarital sex, but he did the same and soon after died. My friend who was all into healing crystals and natural remedies thought hospitals were dangerous and unhealthy. Died from sepsis after home childbirth. My neighbor just did a natural childbirth. She got really sick and ended up with the end stages of sepsis. They were able to save her, but geez. I knew a guy from playing ice hockey who everyone loved. He was the kinda guy that had a ton of friends but always talked about a lot of speed limits being dumb. One day his friend was driving and he was in the middle of the back seat between 2 more friends and another friend in the front passenger seat when they were going so fast, while drunk, that they didn't just wrap their car around a tree, they split it in half. Like from one door to the other sideways. My buddy wasn't wearing a seatbelt as well, so he was violently thrown from the car and probably became a paintball against the tree or other car parts. Absolutely brutal way to die, and he was only 18. Don't drink and drive, and the speed limit isn't just a suggestion, folks. Also, the driver was a goalie for another team with a college scholarship, but he shattered his hip and will never play again. All the people in the car were star or close to star hockey players, but the guy I knew was the only one with no seatbelt. Had a family member who didn't take their diabetes seriously. Ate whatever they wanted whenever because they knew how to correctly dose insulin so they could eat like shit. Surprise, it wasn't managed correctly and they ended up dying of kidney failure. A distant cousin of mine was type 1. It was either not eating for long periods for her, or binging. She was on dialysis the last few years of her life and died at only 33. Every tourist who climbs on the goddamn black rocks in Peggy's Cove. The ocean is unpredictable, assholes. Stay off those rocks. Visited their last fall and damp. Wish I'd taken a pic of the warning sign. It actually says no one's going to risk their lives to rescue you. A famous example would be Dale Earnhardt's refusal to wear the hands device, referring to it as that damn noose. It probably would have saved his life. I'm not familiar with the device or how he died, other than a crash. Could you explain more? Knew a girl in high school who refused to wear a seatbelt because it messed up her clothes. Died in a car accident, and if she'd worn a seatbelt, probably minor injuries instead, she went through the windshield. Don't know them personally, but a guy at work had a sister who went ahead with her wedding plans during one of the big COVID waves. Their grandmother and another elderly relative died, as well as someone on the groom's side, and a bunch of other people got really sick. Both the couple's mothers got extremely sick, ending up with life-changing long COVID symptoms. The couple got COVID too, and ended up spending almost their entire honeymoon in bed, and not in the good way. The part that boils my co-worker's blood, his sister to this day whines that her honeymoon was ruined and that she deserves a second honeymoon, and also constantly complains that her mom and her mother-in-law never help her with her kids. Bitch, they're disabled because you wanted to cosplay as a princess during a fucking pandemic. You should be happy you didn't kill them, like you killed your grandma and your great aunt. My co-worker hardly speaks to her anymore. Sounds like what happened to my dear friend. Got COVID-19 at her niece's wedding and died. My grandmother always had a disdain for the geriatric population. She became 99. I got the polio vaccine in elementary school. Even that young, I was glad to get it. The only kid who didn't get the vaccine got polio and died. I still remember walking past their house and feeling sad but confused that his parents didn't let him get vaccinated. Just fucking unbelievable that people made up conspiracy theories about the COVID vax. In Falmouth, Michigan, up north, there were two brothers, pillars of the community. One owned a hardware store, the other a grocery store featuring a meat counter with great deals. They didn't get the vax, both caught COVID and died. Owner of a cute little ice cream shop in Roscommon, Michigan said the COVID vax was a government plot to control us. Got COVID and died. Really sad, as he had just reconnected with a woman he met in college. He called her Cupcake. I just don't get it. People must have a very deep-seated, emotional need to believe that COVID is all made up. It's like they can't deal with the idea that a deadly virus can just show up for no reason, without warning, and threaten lives. Even if it requires all kinds of ridiculous mental gymnastics that ultimately imply much worse scenarios. Suicide. If they joke about it, don't take it with a grain of salt. Exactly. Just in case, my husband has a best friend who stayed with us for a week recently, and he joked about it several times while here, and every time he did I would always pause and say, okay, but for real, if you're feeling that way, this is a safe place and you can always talk to us. He brushed it off each time, but still, I feel compelled to say something just in case he, or anyone else, is serious. This woman used to come into the store I worked in and start fights with the staff. During COVID, she was extremely bad about this. BC, she was an anti-masker, and even though we never actually forced customers to wear masks, she would come in yelling stuff like they better not try to make me wear a mask when I have severe asthma. Sometimes she wouldn't even buy anything. She would just walk around hoping for an altercation. Well, she ended up getting COVID and died. Sounds like a pretty good trade-off. We were driving on I-44 in Missouri about to enter Oklahoma. Missouri has strict motorcycle helmet laws. Oklahoma did not at the time. A guy way old enough to know better passed us a few minutes before Oklahoma on his motorcycle with his helmet on in MO. We saw him stopped under an overpass just inside Oklahoma with the helmet off, putting it in the carry box thing. He then passed us again. We were speeding ourselves. About 20 minutes later we came upon him laying in the middle of the highway, no idea where the motorcycle ended up. Several cars had stopped. I was driving so I didn't try to look over. My husband said it was really good not to look. One guy that had stopped was vomiting. Well, you'll be happy to know that Missouri has since repealed those strict helmet laws, so now even more people can die because freedoms. Guy I hardly knew, friend of a friend, had big opinions on motorbike helmets and freedom, ethos of the open road or whatever. Helmets are mandatory here. Apparently came of his bike while not wearing a helmet and spent ages in a coma before passing away. Apparently if he had been wearing a helmet he would have walked away with no significant injuries. What are you gonna do? Stab me? OMG, I worked at a group home for juvenile delinquents and one of our residents pulled a knife on me. I froze for a second and asked that same question. The kid thought about it and just said, "Nah, you're alright," and put the knife down. I'm sorry it didn't work out better for your friend. My brother's ex criticized my cousin for taking her own life, calling her selfish and whatnot. A few years back she died right after making sure my brother and our parents had full custody of the child they had together. I don't hold it against her, as I understand she was in a dark place and being manipulated by her own family. Important to know, a lot of suicidal people try to tie up loose ends prior to taking their own life. So a sign of a plan for suicide is people behaving selflessly, giving away possessions, paying off old debts, finding good homes for their pets or their children or other dependents, setting up bank accounts and trust funds for loved ones. So if you see these things happening, Google how to help your loved one, and know that if anything happens, it wasn't your fault for taking inaction or taking a positive action that didn't change the outcome. Once the idea of suicide takes hold in the brain, it gets harder and harder to shake, like it becomes part of a default code for solving life's problems. My grandpa, he survived the larynx cancer he ignored for a long time, but many years ago he died in hospital from a gastric ulcer. He managed to ignore those for so long. When he finally went to get help, this thing broke and he bled to death. Not died, but I watched a guy sit down and mock how stupid someone was when they had managed to stab themselves in their hand. He proceeded to out a knife blade right through his hand. This one is a twofer. Smoker friend talked about smoking wouldn't get them. Smoker friend put on oxygen and laughed about how they'd probably blow themselves up. Yup, that happened. He didn't die yet, but my dad openly mocked the people who believed that COVID-19 was real and refused to wear a mask in public. Well, eventually he got it himself and had to go to the hospital for almost a month. He now needs to have an oxygen tank nearby and can't even go up a flight of stairs without losing breath, and he likely will never recover completely. He told me while he was sick that COVID is no joke. No shit, dad. That's what everyone was saying. Mom. COVID. Wouldn't wear a mask, wanted visitors, big Thanksgiving. My sister attended, got so sick she almost died. Then my mother, refusing to go to hospital. Sister not yet recovered, went to check on her and had to call ambulance. But nothing helped. Yep, my friend's dad died from the COVID that didn't exist and was a big pharma hoax according to him. She is still devastated 2 years later. I work in the emergency department and COVID was a frustrating time to say the least. I had a patient who insisted that COVID doesn't actually make people unwell. I tried saying, well, you definitely have pneumonia based on your x-ray. Why not stay and get that treated and work out later why your COVID test came back positive? She needed 35% oxygen. She tried to storm out and I was walking behind her with a chair, so caught her before she collapsed and took her back to her room to reattach her treatments. She ended up dying and I had to respond in writing to a complaint her family made, claiming the medical professionals had led to her death because COVID is just a cold. She was not the only one. Hospital beds all occupied. I'm caring for a beyond full department for 12+ hours while patients wait for bed to become available. ICU level patients being negotiated by phone across the country due to capacity issues. And I had to spend time near begging conspiracy patients to let me treat them, and my time off dealing with the admin their beliefs generated. If we experience another pandemic in my lifetime, I'm quitting. I live in Western Washington. Yes, it's the Pacific. No, it's not warm. Even on hot summer days, that water is seldom warmer than 55 degrees or so. Yes, the rip currents are real. No, it is not safe to let your kid boogie board on the beach when they post warnings about sneaker waves. If you aren't familiar, a sneaker wave is an unusually large wave that can easily swamp the beach without warning. Signs everywhere warn people not to turn their backs on the water in certain conditions. People die every summer because they won't listen. Most think they know better because they live near the beach or have frequently visited other beaches. I moved here, but grew up on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. All beaches have their own idiosyncrasies. Listen to the locals, people. Alcohol and or drug addiction denial. I know several that have died of addiction. I'm an ER nurse. The number of people I watch die from a fake Chinese virus is high.